required for healthy democratic deliberation these days. Today's talk about non-verbal communications in classical Chinese text before and after the Warring States period in China and their significances in Chinese philosophy perfectly meets our demand. Specifically first, given that non-verbal communication such as silence, laughter, and bodily movements, regardless whether it is written in a classical text or it is situated in an actual conversational circumstance, has been unduly rendered as nothing but a mere representation of the established social norms and social political structures in a society. This work will provide us with imperative insights through which we can see the variegated and hidden functions of a non-verbal communication in our relationships with others. According to today's speaker, our consideration of non-verbal communication shouldn't be confined within a form of habituated communication. It should include other forms of non-verbal communication, such as arts of resistance against established social political hegemonies, spontaneous exchanges in interpersonal relationships, and bodily conduct beyond our reasonable control. Such an approach to non-verbal communication is significantly meaningful if we consider the arts of socio-political disguise in our daily lives, that the non-verbal communication of subordinate groups in a society has been made in the forms of a hidden transcript or fugitive conduct. Surely this sort of hidden or fugitive non-verbal communication cannot be interpreted and understood with a single set of behavior patterns, which has been often suggested by psychologists who seek to understand non-verbal communication through universal patterns of human behaviors across cultures. As a matter of fact, most of the non-verbal communication conduct of marginalized and subordinate groups cannot be interpreted either by overt readable patterns of behavior, nor through obviously recognizable compliance to dominant groups. They should be read through what today's speaker says, quote, a deeper reading of cultural sensitivities, politics, interpersonal relations, and identities, end quote. In this context, possible implications of today's talk cannot be confined within the hermeneutics of classical Chinese text. They will cover a broad range of non-verbal strategies through which diverse voices under social political dominations, even in a disguised form, can be incorporated into public understanding. Second, as we will learn from today's lecture, studies of a non-verbal communication relationship in Chinese philosophy aim to help better understand the changing nature of interpersonal relationships. We all know that in the cosmology of Chinese philosophy, all things are rendered as interconnected and constantly changing. And we also know that this kind of constantly changing cosmologies is beginning from living itself as the motive force behind any change, and any change arises spontaneously from what has been called as Tao that resists any objectifications, but gives us a world of boundless becomings, which is not in the form of things, that is what it is, but in the forms of events, that is what happens. However, when we say about communicative relationships, particularly in terms of moral cultivation or ethical virtuosity, we often put this ever-changing relationship behind the question of which relationship is more important than the others and how this relationship should be constituted through what. In this context, for today's speaker, even role-based interpersonal ethics, which seeks to find out appropriate behaviors through roles we are taking in interpersonal relationships, such as father and son, are too stable and too prescriptive to understand the ever-changing nature of a relationship. Likewise, today's lecture will give us another guide to see again what we have been taking for granted as the functions of nonverbal communication, particularly with respect to spontaneous emergence of moral and social orders through our relationship with others. All right, let me give you a brief introduction of Professor Ai Yuan for our audiences today. Ai Yuan is Associate Professor of Philosophy at Tsinghua University. She received her PhD from Oriental Studies at the University of Oxford in 2018. She joined the Faculty of Philosophy at Tsinghua University in 2019, and since then, she has been teaching Chinese philosophy and comparative philosophy there. Her main teaching and research interests are Chinese philosophy, particularly before and after the Warring States period, comparative philosophy, and contemporary philosophy. And she has been serving as an English editor of International Studies on Confucianism since 2022. And she has numerous articles in English and Chinese, including Toleration and Justice in the Laozi, which was published by Philosophy East and West in 2023, and Laughter in Early China, the Zhuangzi and Beyond, which was published by Bulletin of the School of Oriental and African Studies in 2021. And she is the author of Nonverbal Communication in Early China, which will be forthcoming soon from State University of New York Press. All right, let's bring our guest today. Hi, Bian Lao Xie. Hi, how are you doing?
Hey, Professor Kwok, thank you so much. It renders me speechless with such a thoughtful and comprehensive introduction. Not only just about my...
Okay.
Yeah, thank you
so
much.
Well, actually, as I said, I really appreciate, kind of you come and join us today, in your packed schedule. And then, as I said, you have a 50 to 1 hour, kind of with that, and then followed by Q&A. Okay, it is all up to you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I will talk about 40 minutes because I think a lot of things we can talk about during our Q&A. I really try to make our argument straightforward. So later,
no problem. No problem. Okay,
we
thank
can
you.
have more discussion. Hello, everybody. I'm Yuan Ai. Today's topic is about representing nonverbal communication in early China. I want to firstly let you know who I am, what I do, so you can position me in a better place and relay my research to yours. When I share with you my research and research funding, what I just want to show is that a lot of times, especially in mainland China, if I say I do silence, I do nonverbal communication, it seems that it's very hard to position me somewhere in the traditional category. So if you want to find this category more familiar, then I claim myself to be a Taoist scholar and a scholar working on comparative philosophy. Primarily, I work on cross-cultural studies of the Zhuangzi, which is one of the most representative early Chinese Taoist texts. Additionally, I've been drawn to the study of silence and nonverbal communication, which is something I want to share with you in more detail today. At the same time, I've been working on edited volumes with my colleague Chen Bishen about the revival of Confucianism in mainland China in the past 10 years, which is a special issue appeared in the journal Asian Studies. I'm also working with Professor Liu Xiaogan on the Tao Companion series of the Tao Companion to the Philosophy of the Tao Te Ching, which will also be forthcoming this coming summer. I hope this book, this edited volume will also render some information for those who are interested in the most recent discussions of the Tao Te Ching Laozi in English literature. In the meanwhile, I'm working with my colleagues Liu Fenrong and Professor Jeremy Seligman, working on beyond Moism logic in early China, which is something we try to do using the discussion of logic and textual studies of early Chinese texts to combine these two disciplines together and talk about what could we learn from early Chinese logic. But today's focus is nonverbal communication. I want to tell you how I come to do this type of research. I think my education gave me a lot of training, which renders my interest into communication and how I come to persuade you, how the text come to persuade us. My undergraduate was in Renmin University, where I study 国学, so classical studies. And then I get philosophy training at CUHK in Hong Kong, wherein I basically receive very systematic and traditional philosophical training. But I find that after having this training, I find that my heart lies in early Chinese philosophy. So then I went ahead to England, to SOAS, and study sinology, where I learned how sinologists read early Chinese texts in a cross-cultural and interdisciplinary manner. And I find that the way they read text is quite different from the way I learned in my undergraduate studies. And afterwards, I studied with Dirk Meyer at Oxford and pursue my DPhil, working on the topic of accepting situations beyond control in the Zhuangzi, which seems to be quite a topic during COVID for this contemporary political atmosphere, as Professor Kwa rightly notes. For my DPhil, I try to dive into 3 different types of questions which are related to accepting things that are beyond our control, that we don't have a direct say to how it turns out to be. So then I wonder, what does it mean to accept? What does it mean to adapt to those kind of uncontrollable situations? And if we are able to, if the early Chinese philosophy allow us to accept and adapt, then how do we evaluate acceptance in light of contemporary philosophical discussions? And finally, how do early Chinese texts, particularly the Zhuangzi, express its ideas? For example, ideas of acceptance. And I find out that laughter is one of the ways that the Zhuangzi talk about how we actually accept without necessarily directly using words. And that really got me interested. And then that leads me to the discussion of nonverbal communication. But I want to say that even though I claim to be writing the first book, providing the first systematic understanding of nonverbal communication in early China, I think Corinne Dufour earlier already wrote about to what extent Zhuangzi use about its bodily movement to engage, to teach. She writes that Zhuangzi's masters do not literally sit still, but, however, it nevertheless remain unmoved or uninterested. Not awaiting a disciple's arrival, they are engaged in some action. One might be fishing, another feeding a cow, plowing land, catching cicadas, slaughtering an ox, felling trees, carving wood, playing the lute, or simply having fun. The most astonishing is the master who is hopping along, slapping his buttocks when addressed by the disciple. So reading about those, together with my understanding of the prevalent use of laughter in the Zhuangzi, I come to notice that it seems that there are a lot more discussions of nonverbal communication beyond what we already find out. So if you want to know more about others' research on nonverbal communication, you can also look at, for example, Hapsmeyer's studies of humor and laughter, D'Ambrosio's studies of humor, Ames and Albertine's studies of gesture, posture, and Confucian virtue expressions. Gavani's and Hapsmeyer's studies of, for example, the difference between ku and qi, social willing and weeping. Gavani and Chapman's discussion of disability and gait, so crippled behavior. Avita Room's discussion of drums and bells as something that we use to direct actions in warfare. And how we actually understand Ba Mai, the tactile pose, and discussed by Elizabeth Xu. All these kind of things are allowing me to notice that there are so many things that we didn't really look at when we read early Chinese text. So what we have been looking at while we study early Chinese text? What are the things that we have assumed about what we can learn from early Chinese philosophy? I think the large part of the scholarship has focused on what other people have said. Analects is a collection of sayings. The Zhuangzi is a compilation of anecdotes full of fascinating and humorous conversations. Guanzi, Mozi, Xunzi, we can find similar things, sayings, words, utterances in all early Chinese texts, and those are the things I find most dominantly being used as the central evidence of what represents the wisdom and nature of early Chinese philosophy. But one thing we seem to all know is that what we say is not necessarily exactly what we communicate. A lot of times we use verbal and nonverbal aspects to think about what we communicate. A universal fact is something that allows us to enter into the topic of nonverbal communication very quickly. Human beings actually communicate with their whole body. Think about any communication. A neighbor you come across in the street, you say hi, you nod. The way teachers communicate to their students with a kind of laughter, with their expression of sign, 叹气, with their way of moving their bodies. If you are angry, your words will render in a louder way. You will talk quicker, and you will put more emphasis on the words you want to highlight. This is wrong. A lot of times, even though we talk exactly the same words, we don't mean the same when we use different bodily and nonverbal aspects to communicate. So this means that if we want to know what people communicate, if we only study what they say, what are the words of the ancient sages, it is possible that we have missed the larger part of what they communicate, while only focusing on what they say. My mom is the best case to show that a lot of times when we haven't seen each other for a long time, she would just come to me and say, oh, you can iron your clothes better, or your room can be nicer and tidier. But I think what she says is different from what she actually means. She means, have you been taking care of yourself? What can I do to help you while I am here to make your life easier? But those are not the words she say. But what I hear is that those are the things she means to say. And those are the things I find also widely shared in early Chinese philosophical teachings. Apart from nonverbal communication being a universal fact across region, across culture, across gender, a way to communicate that human beings use, another forgotten fact about early Chinese philosophy is that in addition to the beautiful words, philosophical arguments that we have been learning and dealing with for as long as I can remember, in early Chinese philosophy, there are a lot of nonverbal aspects we can quickly locate in early Chinese texts. These texts include philosophical text, literary text, historical text, anecdotal text, and commentaries. Sometimes those kind of texts are just mentioned. The nonverbal aspects are just mentioned. For example, you can think about many texts talks about 约. what one says, what one claims, what one utters. But then before the 曰, what did they say? They talk about 怒而曰, so angrily says. They talk about 笑 and 曰, they laugh and they say. Sometimes we can think about this text not just being mentioned quickly, but also being highlighted in the text and becoming the central part of discussion. For example, somebody remains silent, and then the ruler says, oh, how come you're silent? And then the disciple or the minister again remains silent. And then the ruler says, now explain. So things like that, or Confucius' silence to certain rulers has been commented upon very differently. Those are the things I think are very obvious facts, so long as we take the sensitivity to look at the text. But those are the texts I will claim rather forgotten for a long time. And my book is simply to remind the readers that there are so many things have been used, have been said in early Chinese text, but haven't yet been systematically reconstructed while engaging with the contemporary discussion of nonverbal communication. So in this book, what I try to do is to provide the first systematic reconstruction of nonverbal communication in early China. We can quickly remember in early Chinese texts, many texts has already said, our words cannot fully articulate what we mean. Our sayings cannot fully express our emotions of love, sadness, appreciation. So we are very familiar with this kind of sayings. And later we will see there are so many stories in early Chinese text have been consciously or unconsciously using the idea of meaning beyond words, communicating beyond sayings. But what they don't have, and it is what my book humbly tried to do, is to systematically reconstruct that. Reconstruct something using our contemporary academic language towards something that our ancient sages and ancient philosophers have been actually noticing and have been widely applying to their compilation and crafting of the stories, but they haven't articulately, explicitly lay things down as we do in contemporary scholarship. And that's something what I have been trying to do in this book. In this book, what I want to show is that nonverbal signals actually communicate motivation, relationships, our attitudes and emotions, and how we should actually read text by words and nonverbal aspects, because taking these two aspects into consideration, we can understand how the meaning in early Chinese stories, philosophical sayings are constructed. The process of their meaning construction is something we can readily learn by taking into account the nonverbal aspects. My questions in this book will involve, for example, how are nonverbal cues, nonverbal signals perceived? How do we understand nonverbal signals in early China? Do they find them strange, or do they find them very commonly appear in our conversation? Why do early Chinese texts present and interpret nonverbal behaviors? What are their communicative functions? How does nonverbal communication affirm or subvert verbal arguments? But most importantly, my question will be, why early Chinese editors write down nonverbal elements in text, in philosophical, historical, anecdotal text that focus on words, sayings, and utterances? If words are enough to tell us the meaning, what exactly is the very reason that the philosophers write down the nonverbal aspects that don't have a very fixed and stable meaning, that requires the listeners and contemporary readers like us to decode what they mean? Those are my questions. And my answer to why we should care about early Chinese nonverbal communication, first of all, is that there are a lot of evidence that allow us to entertain, oh, what do they mean? How do I divide them into different categories? How are they being used? But I think, as I said, what we can do nowadays is to use contemporary theories and systematic writings to replicate and to reconstruct what early Chinese philosophers have already consciously aware of and have been consciously applied to in early Chinese text, but haven't yet systematically reconstruct. And our job is to use contemporary language and academic theories to help them reconstruct what they haven't been articulated very systematically. Together, we can think about some new questions and we throw back into early Chinese philosophy. For example, in addition to thinking about, what this concept can tell us, how this concept and that concept interact with each other in intellectual history, we can think about how knowledge has been constructed through communicating to other people, and how communication itself construct and reconstruct meaning and knowledge. Additionally, we can think about, have we actually been using the sayings in the right way as textual evidence if saying doesn't necessarily represent what people mean? Then when we think about, we can actually understand what's in the mind of the ancient sages and what is exactly their wisdom, and we simply focus on their sayings. What are the parts that we have been missing? So those are the things that by taking into consideration of the nonverbal aspects of communication, we can think about what is their theory of communication, what is their theory of persuading other people, and what is the question they were interested in. What is their way of considering our use of their sayings as philosophical evidence? So by saying nonverbal communication, I have to readily admit I have been studying verbal communication as well. It's just the focus is not just verbal communication. I take them together into account. Now I want to use this PPT to briefly introduce what I take to be the field of nonverbal communication. I really have to admit, before engaging into nonverbal communication, I take single case studies, for example, silence and laughter, as the central object of inquiry. But then once I dive myself into nonverbal communication, I realized, oh my God, the scholarship is so huge and the discipline is so broad that it really surprised me how big of the field nonverbal communication is. So those are the comprehensive introductory books that we can give a impression of. Because I think nonverbal communication is just a human way to communicate. It's also an animal way to communicate. So long as people notice that, you will then quickly find that sociologists, anthropology, psychology, detective disciplines, social science, philosophy, all these kind of discipline have been deeply engaged with how we can learn from the nonverbal aspects of communication. So in itself, it's a huge discipline, very readily present itself, and very cross-cultural and interdisciplinary. So this is the beautiful and brutal fact of nonverbal communication. When I start to dive in, I feel, oh yeah, this is so much I have to read, much more than the Zhuangzian scholarship that I seems to have to master. And then the second question is, if I do nonverbal communication in early China, to take this universal human way to communicate and situated in the different types and genres of text thousands of years ago, then what am I doing? Am I trying to find something equally universal and simply apply contemporary theories to ancient texts? Or am I supposed to find something unique in early Chinese texts? So this has been a question that somehow take me along with my research. So my current answer is that I think if you have to think about the way Chinese people communicate, and then take about the current research of nonverbal communication, I will say we're nothing special. We are just like human beings. The way we communicate, the way we laugh, the way I touch my nose, it's not that different from people in different culture. But on the other hand, if we take nonverbal communication as something unique in a culture, we can see something so unique. If we think about 4 o'clock, I have a coffee with my friend. I think then if I have the appointment with an American friend, that friend might show up around 3:50. I think that should be assumed. If you actually show up around 4 o'clock, you appear a bit rude. But if I say, hey, 4 o'clock, let's have a coffee with my Italian friend, I think she actually show up 6 o'clock and being very happy and very chill. Hey, how are you doing? Nothing to excuse about. And sometimes if I have a dinner arrangement with my Chinese friends, they will not say 4 o'clock because of the traffic in Beijing. So they will say around 4 o'clock. Then we can arrive in the approximate 1 hour difference. So even though we have a 4 o'clock as a universal way to calculate time, the way people respond to 4 o'clock is different. It's not to say that across culture, across region, across different gender, people understand 4 o'clock differently. They all understand what o'clock means to be a 4 o'clock, but the way they respond to that can be highlighted differently. And that's my answer to early Chinese nonverbal communication. We can say there's nothing special. Everything can be universalized and can be found elsewhere. But what I also want to highlight here is that if we take the spotlight to early Chinese text, then what we find out is that in early Chinese nonverbal communication, we can find some features that are very contextually situated, focusing on how our nonverbal signal can change the relationship we have, which is different from how the society gives us the relationship. And those are the things I will use some case studies to share. So as I mentioned, at this moment, if you look at nonverbal communications, the literature is huge, but they are the debates between whether it is universal or not is also something in the nonverbal communication itself. Some psychologists want to say across culture, across region, if you look at these 5 different ways of facial expressions, you should be able to identify how they feel. The first picture, we might say this person feel a little bit sad. Now, later you can tell me you already see something different. The second picture, we can say he's happy. The third one could be something indicating anger. The third one could be reflecting on somebody's feeling of being scared. And next one, the last one, is something we might say she is a little surprised. Now, if you share what I just said by identifying how these people feel, well, this philosopher will tell you this is correct because facial expressions, despite cultural and social differences, has some universal features we can identify and see through people. And some universal things we can also find from traffic lights. And if you look at the sky, you can see to what extent this person is an undergraduate, master, and PhD in England, whether they get full A grades or whether the grades is not as good as somebody else. And we have all flags that show us respect, love, and all these other emotions. And if you look at this Case Middleton laughter, I do try to find some different kinds of laughter. Then what do you see? Can you really see from what philosophers show us the 5 different phases? Is she happy? Is she tired? Is she engaging? Is she feeling bored? So if we assume that we can take a universal reading of facial expression, the other type of philosophy will tell us, no, it's not true. Because what we do with our facial expressions is very socially oriented. We have a very clear goal to achieve when we show what we show. For example, if you see a dog and you do a gesture like, try to scare the dog away, are you really angry? Or are you pretending to be angry? And think about our way to deal with kids. If our kid is doing something wrong and you try to say, no, this is wrong, and you seem to show that you're not very happy with what the kid has been doing, are you really angry or are you behaving angrily? So other type of scholarship wants to show, no, actually, human and facial bodily gestures, facial expressions, our tone of voice are not something that requires a universal reading because they are all socially situated and contextually reconstructed. So we shouldn't take a universal assumption to study that. And I think those debates, I take a very soft landing. Both are right. It depends on what you highlight in this type of research. And this is another type of nonverbal signals. Are we very clear? So if you are a specialist of nonverbal communication, or if you say you are from the same culture of this couple, can you really tell what they're thinking? Are they really doing that because they have the bodily expressions that shared universally, or because they're doing that at that moment to show us something particularly? So those are the questions and debates I take into early Chinese philosophical discussions. Now, if we think of nonverbal communication in early China, what do we think about in the first place? Ritual. Those are the books and selected books. There are so many more that study 礼 and ritual communication, 礼仪性交往 in early China. What is ritual language? Ritual language, I would say, is the universal language that make what we do, who we are, how we communicate to other people clearly and understandably. The way a teacher talks to a student will show what a teacher is supposed to talk and how a teacher is supposed to talk through teaching, to teach through talking. So ritual communication fits more with the aim of constructing a rather universal language. So the way we talk, the way we behave will become easily understandable by other people. Li Chenyang talked about that as cultural grammar. So if we learn a language, of course, we have to learn grammar like every kid. Even though you are a native speaker, you have to, in order to really master the language, you have to learn the grammar. But a person who really grasps what it means to master a language then shouldn't be confined by the cultural grammar. So a person really knowing what is virtue then wouldn't be confined by the ritual communication. But only through ritual can we learn what is to be a virtuous ritual expression. But what's underlying this kind of assumption is that 礼 itself, it's like a cultural grammar, something that's shared, something that's clearly presented, no matter who you are, so long as you see that, so long as you hear that, you're supposed to understand that. So grammar is the structure of the language. You don't need to negotiate what it means in this particular context. Grammar is just a set of rules. But is that something that we can think about when we think about laughter in early China? What is the spotlight we take to think about laughter? If we think about every nonverbal behavior as ritual, then we should be confident to say, yeah, at this point, if you laugh, then you're rude. At this point, if you laugh, you shows that you're educated, you're respectful. But is that the case we can think about laughter when we take the perspective of laughter into early Chinese texts? In this essay, Laughter in Early China, the Zhuangzi and Beyond, I argue that we need to think about laughter beyond humor studies. Because for a long time, if we think about laughter, then we think laughter is the expression, the outburst of laugh that shows that something humorous is going on. But I think if we take a rhetorical and communicative perspective of laughter, then what we see is that the way we laugh actually changes our relationships. And we can think about what we say, but what we mean through laughter, in addition to what we say. Now I want to take you through this particular story and tell you what I mean. And if you use your intuition and find different response to my interpretation, that's actually great. That means that we have different interpretation of laughter. So I really love to hear how you feel about that. The story is about the Confucian student Zigong. Zigong had been rambling in the south of Chu and was returning to Jing. As he passed on the north of Han, he saw an old man who was going to work on his vegetable garden. He had dug his channels, gone to the well, and was bringing from that in his arm in a jar of water to pour into them. So basically the description was that the old gardener was doing something very slowly, doing the every step of the way using his labor and his body. Toiling away, he expended a great deal of strength, but the result which he accomplished was very small. In our contemporary way is that we will see an old man trying to do something very slowly and very inefficiently without using any supporting tools. And this is when Zigong jumped in. Zigong said, "Hey, do you know that there's a xie contrivance here, by means of which 100 plots of ground might be irrigated in one day?" So what Zigong is doing here is to say to the gardener, do you actually know this kind of tool? Then if you use this tool, you don't need to be so tired. You can work much more efficient. Have you heard about that? And then the gardener looked up at him and said, "So how does this tool actually work?" Zigong said, "It is a lever made of wood, heavy behind and light in front. It raises the water as quickly as you could do with your hand." So Zigong then tells the gardener, what is this tool actually look like? Now, what are they doing here? Suppose you are trying your best to write your final essay. You come up with an argument, and then you come across your roommate who study, for example, some other major, and then you want to share. You talk to your neighbor. Yeah, this is what I've been doing. And your neighbor just quickly search ChatGPT to say, actually, have you heard about this topic? This can actually help you improve your argument very quickly. Now, what do you feel? This is the experience of this gardener and Zigong. This is where laughter comes. The gardener flushed with anger, 愤然作色, 而笑, before laughing. And this is my translation. So I put them together, anger and laughter. And I wonder, how does this laughter work here? We need to read the following before we analyze. How do we analyze the laughter here? The gardener said, I have heard from my teacher that where there are ingenious contrivances, there are sure to be plotted things, and that where there are plotted things, there's sure to be a scheming mind. But when there's a scheming mind in the breast, you lost the purity of the mind. And when this pure simplicity is impaired, the spirit becomes unsettled, and thus the unsettled spirit is not the proper residence of the Tao. It's not that I do not know, but I should be ashamed to use it. And finally, Zigong blushes with charring and then look very embarrassed. So here, before analyzing what laughter do here, we need to note it in ancient Chinese language, this 机事, so ingenious contrivance, and 机心 and 机械 all sound exactly the same. So there's a strong sense of humor in the gardener's sayings of 机事, 机械, and 机心, because it sounds exactly the same, but it leads to the opposite of meaning. And this is actually quite humorous. But I think there's something more going on that the writer of the Zhuangzi wants to highlight the gardener firstly flush with anger and then laugh. For laughter, here, so we've already talked about this laughter actually is humorous, that signals the witty words, the pun that the gardener is able to say. It's very important to know that these witty words are coming from the words of a gardener. And those supposedly witty words and the words that represent the Tao from Zigong is actually losing its meaning in Tao. And this is something that very humorously and beautifully presented in many Zhuangzian stories. But there's more about the laughter here. Through laughter, the gardener is able to distance himself from the angry emotions aroused by Zigong. And in response, he was able to provide the humorous saying. When his laughter appears, it dissipates his anger against Zigong, who is somebody because of his seemingly higher position in the society and Zigong's assumed authority, consider himself entitled to lecture anyone, because Zigong is not actually a specialist in gardening, but he always feels that he has the right to give advice to other people, even to a gardener who is working on gardening. The act of laughing also, here's the important part, signals a transfer of authority and power. Originally, as a disciple of Confucius, rather than an ordinary gardener, Zigong is supposed to understand the Tao. Regardless of Zigong's social status, a gardener can be expected to know more about growing plants. So Zigong attempt to teach a professional how to do his job is laughed away by this gardener. Laughter here represent a subversion of social status and moral authority without explicitly saying it. The simple gardener is shown to be the true possessor of the Tao and the practitioner of practical knowledge, finally worthy of our respect, while Zigong, in the end, is left dumbstruck. The laughter of the gardener also helps us to facilitate a conversation between people from two different stratas. We can suppose that if the gardener didn't change his emotions and change what this conversation is supposed to be through this laughter, then the following conversation will always be confined with the existing social status that the ritual gives us. A lot of times we enter into the classroom being a teacher and being the student. But so long as there is some kind of gesture provided by the teacher, or so long there's some kind of gesture provided by the student, for example, laughter, for example, raising the hand, then what it means could be the relationship changes. It's no longer necessarily a teacher talking to a student, but two-person interest in knowledge talking to each other. Two-person extremely confused with an understanding of what it means, trying to give advice to each other. So what laughter does here, according to the Zhuangzi, is the changing of the existing power dynamics that society gives us while we enter into our social roles. And this laughter subverts that and changes that, and therefore allowing a gardener being able to use the humorous and witty language to judge people like Zigong and to give him a lecture. So laughter here functions primarily on the changing interpersonal relationships. Nonverbal signals such as laughter here provide a performative construction of interpersonal relationships, including role affirmation and role reversal, subversion of power, social, political relationships. The next example and the final example I want to show is the performance of silence in early China. Now we think about silence. What do we think about? If you are coming from the background of free speech, you will think only speech allows us to express, to exercise our rights and power. And silence is the opposite. It's a lack of intention, lack of ability to say, and lack of channel to express. So silence is often associated with being silenced, being powerless, being unintentional, being indifferent. Now, if you're coming from the Chinese background, when you think about silence, what else do you think about? You might be thinking about there are a lot of things, a lot of love, a lot of care is expressed beyond words. A lot of deep philosophical thoughts can only be expressed through bodily behavior, unarticulatable in words. So there are deep wisdom and deep philosophical ideas that are unexpressible in words. So those are the things that people have been focusing on when we think about silence. But early Chinese texts take an equal concern in asking the question of what if people can say? What if people are able to use their words to say? And what if people are supposed to say because of their social roles and political position, but they don't? What if they can, they should, and they are supposed to, but they remain silent? What does that mean? And those are my questions into silence in this paper. I want to use this particular story to share with you what I understand of silence in this nonverbal context. Yanzi is one of the most eloquent ministers in early China. He is known as the minister best in words, in able to use words to persuade his ruler. And in this story, we will see Yanzi's use of words together with nonverbal aspects. Master Yan went on the embassy to Lu, and Lord Jing had the people of the capital build a large tower as a so-called heavy labor, but it was still unfinished. When the weather turned cold, when the ruler wants to build his grand palace, every district had people who were freezing and hungry. The people of the capital were hoping for Master Yan to return to save them. When Master Yan did arrive, he reported on the success of his mission. His lordship gave him permission to sit down, as they drank wine and enjoyed themselves. Master Yan said, "Now, ruler, if you give me permission, I would like to perform a song." He sang the following. The common people have a saying, "The icy water soaked me, what shall I do? The ruler has ruined us, what shall I do?" Basically saying, hey, because of your grand building, we're suffering. What can I do? Who can save me? When Master Yan had finished his singing, he heaved a sigh, and began to cry. His lordship then stopped the feast. The ruler said, "Why are you so sad? Is this because of the work on the great tower? I will immediately put an end to it." Now, if you're a normal person and if you really want to save the people, you're supposed to say, yes, exactly so. But here, the literature gives us a very interesting twist. Master Yan bowed twice and left without speaking. What does that mean? He then went to the great tower. It's even more exaggerated as the story goes on. What did Master Yan do when he sees his people? Master Yan holding a whip, he beat those who were not working at full strength and said, "We petty people all have huts in which to live, whereby we can avoid the heat and the rain. His lordship is constructing a tower, and yet you have not completed work on that. What kind of laborers are you?" This is a very interesting story with so many twists within. And the people of the capital said, "Oh my God, Master Yan is helping people to suppress us. Why is that?" And Confucius heard about this. He sighed and said, "Master Yan is a loyal minister and a fine minister in our day and age." My concern here is, how does the silence work here in this whole context with a series of nonverbal performance and with such a beautiful and controversial words? I think in this case, we can also see when we make a bodily movement like I do now, we can identify different layers of receivers who reads and sees my nonverbal signal. And in this particular context, we can also see so many people receiving Master Yan's silent signal and giving it different interpretations. First, as the direct nonverbal sender, so the person who performed the nonverbal signal, which is Master Yan. Master Yan goes against the banquet ritual and thus directly attract the ruler's attention. His theatrical nonverbal performance reinforced his disagreement, sadness, and voicelessness. His criticism is very effective because it is not appropriate in the context of a celebrate banquet to remain silent, to cry. With his nonverbal performance, he takes the court out of the situation. He changes the celebratory banquet into a scene of a political criticism. So the silence and the crying changes what's the context. Even though they remain exactly in the same physical location, they change the context of the narrative. Second, from the perspective of the author who compiled this particular story, who is also another sender of the nonverbal silent, Yanzi's unexpected action of sighing, bursting into tears, and remaining silent are the dramatic means to make his audience aware both of the people who, like him, are not being heard, and of the political atmosphere in which this event takes place. His series of nonverbal performance also demonstrate loyalty both to his people and to his ruler. Yanzi bows twice and silently leaves with the knowledge that the people's suffering will be end soon. He plans neither to give advice further to correcting the ruler's behavior, nor to explain why the ruler could save his reputation. His respectful performance in court facilitates later what he says to his people at a construction site. He not only praised Lord Jing for providing the people with shelter and support, but also take his full responsibility to the suffering of his people. Yanzi is being a good people, good savior to his people, and a good minister to his ruler by remaining silent and saying later what he says. Third, in response to Yanzi's nonverbal sighing and crying, the ruler, Qi Jinggong, as a direct recipient of the nonverbal signal, he merely feels bad for the construction workers. When he asks, "Why are you so sad?" Is this because of the work of the great tower? I will immediately put an end to it. That's the answer the ruler gave it to Yanzi. But what the ruler doesn't reflect on is his own mistakes or how he has cold-heartedly tortured the people. The ruler's emotional reading of Yanzi's nonverbal behavior shows his lack of ethical concern for the people, as well as the intimate relationship between himself and the ruler. So the ruler cares about Yanzi, but not his people. Fourth, Confucius becoming another receiver and a commentator of Yanzi's nonverbal performance, focus on his intention and speak highly of Yanzi's silence at court and how his actions as a high minister preserve the legacy of the sage kings. As readers in the distance present, we know that Confucius fully recognized that Yanzi is taking responsibility for the people's suffering. But don't forget that we are now taking the God's view about who does what and who feels what as a whole scenario. His words, according to Confucius, Yanzi's words, according to Confucius, points to the story's central meaning while directing the reader's attention to the nonverbal cues. To understand the nonverbal cue, we need to know the meaning behind their words and nonverbal behavior, instead of simply what they say and what they do. Lastly, the text encourages us, the contemporary readers and listeners of the story, who are also, again, the receiver of the nonverbal performance of Yanzi's silence and crying, to develop a sensitivity towards nonverbal signals and to experience how emotions, intentions, and relationship can be delivered wordlessness. We are led to understand Yanzi's choice of silence as a disguised form of political criticism, an indirect reference to those who are voiceless, and as a political strategy used by a minister to maintain the ruler's dignity while humbly remaining in his service. We are taught that Yanzi's remarks at the construction site about suppression only reinforce his choice to remain silent at court, which both protect his ruler at the same time saving his people. Readers of the early Chinese text are reminded that words and nonverbal actions cannot be understood separately. In this particular context, in looking at examples like what I show about laughter and silence, what we can know is that nonverbal communication in early China also give us information, show emotion, express motivation. It helps us to reconsider what is our current communicative relationship and what is our current genre of communication. What is the situation when we talk to each other? And by reconsidering all of that, we can reconstruct a theory of communication to highlight the contextualized meaning beyond sayings and words. And what I say is that they are universal elements that we can find in the communication studies in itself and can be applied to early Chinese communication studies. But what the early Chinese texts highlight is the situational reading of nonverbal signals and how these nonverbal signals, such as laughter, such as silence, changes the genre of the communication and change the way I communicate to you. The Yanzi communicate to the ruler, and the gardener communicated to the zigong, beyond how their social roles give to them. And in this term, I take this book as a teaching material to teach our students in Tsinghua about nonverbal communication. Normally, we will start with what we're familiar with, which is our ritual use of our body and how our bodily behavior, ritual communication is related to our virtual representation. And then I will take them to look at how this body language can be used to subvert social norms and to criticize those social norms, how they marginalize people, how they make people silent. And lastly, we will think about how our social and bodily behavior actually reflect the overall social norms. And those are the things that I also welcome discussions and debates. And this is the thing I want to share. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. I'm gonna turn up. Okay, screen share first. All right, thank you very much. Thank you. It's a fabulous and insightful lecture today. I learned a lot from your systemic analysis of nonverbal communications, particularly in early classical Chinese text. In particular, as I said, before having this workshop, I was, kind of fascinated with the analysis of silence in the early classical Chinese text that is really scintillating, as much as that of laughter in Zhuangzi. Thanks a lot. As I said, I want to have some clarification questions to facilitate some questions from the floor. Okay, let me have a, first question about silence. I come to see that in your readings of early Chinese classical text, silence as a non-verbal signal between sender and receiver in a particular conversation text that has been more emphasized than any other relations, even though you lay out, kind of 5 different kinds of, kind of relationships. Because accordingly, silence can be interpreted as disagreement or resistance according to interpersonal relationship between those who intended to be recognized through using the expression of silence in the text, and those who need to read that silence as a sign or a message, that is receiver. And you have scrutinized silence in the sense that an exposure of silence as a non-verbal sign, kind of, which cannot be, kind of confined within only 2 ways relationship between sender and receiver. That's fantastic. Silence as a non-verbal sign can be read by neighboring contemporary receivers. What do you mean by the people? When it is written, and it can be taken as a public performance that aims to change interpersonal relationship between sender and receiver, even by winning over bystanders. At this juncture, we come to see that this silence is not anymore a kind of a non-verbal communication cue between only 2 persons, right, in the text. By the same token, it can be a public message in the sense of what I mean by art of resistance, with which a sender can enlighten the others, that is delivering, kind of her message to bystanders, or it can be a way in which a sender can subvert interpersonal relationships between sender and receiver. Even it is a subject and king, it could go with a kind of teacher and student by winning over by a neighboring, kind of others. But I'm just wondering if you have analyzed sufficiently silence as a non-verbal communication clue between authors and non-signified readers, as you said, us, you and me, in the early Chinese classical text. I think that this might be a kind of pedagogical question of whether an author did aim to deliver his non-verbal clue to his or her contemporary receivers, or whether the author intend to deliver her, mostly his, in early Chinese, kind of a classical text, hidden transcripts, or his pedagogical messages to non-signified readers, which means next generation to come. In the former case, the intention of signifier of silence is immediate and directly interwoven with the conversation situation in the text. But in the latter case, the intention of the signifier of science cannot be confined within a particular conversation situation, but should be extended to authors' a kind of long-term pedagogical intention, for the sake of which the author uses the expression which is written or description of silence, which is somehow prescriptively, kind of what is narrated as a non-verbal clue In other words, the author wishes to teach not a person in a particular conversation circumstance, but her or his not designated readers. I think given that, kind of you're reading written text rather than placing yourself in any conversation stance, we might need to see this case more seriously. Could you elaborate how the latter case is a kind of relationship with the author and us, or non-signified designated readers? I just wonder that, how this kind of case has been interwoven or included in your readings of nonverbal communications in the early Chinese classical text. This is first question.
Yeah. Shall I answer now?
Answer one by one, and then maybe it could facilitate, kind of more questions from the floor.
Yeah, this is a very, very important one. Actually, I think my very intuitive answer is that when I write them down, I want to, but I actually haven't. I should actually. You're right. Explicitly say that when writing them down, the author or the editor of the text wants to teach us that this is something we should learn about silence. And this is the complicated part. And these several contexts in the Yanzi Chunqiu or in other excavated texts, in other Guanzi texts are rather clear. But one thing that stopped me from making a more definite argument is that in the Analects, if we look at the reception, the commentary of the Confucius repeated silence in the Xunzi, in the Li Ji, then the context is not that clear. And the silence is sometimes criticized as a fear for the power, respect for the ritual. Sometimes it's understood as an act to resist. So in that sense, if they want to teach us, then of course we might be too far away from where they live. So we might not get what they intentionally wanting to teach us. But I would also love to entertain. So for your question, I would say largely I completely agree. But there are some cases I wonder, is it because our reading abilities or commentarial debates, or it is because the editor leave the context rather vague for us to entertain the double meaning? I think that's something Chinese philosophy is quite attractive, is that it seems that both are right. Can Confucius at the same time be respectful and be rebellious? And that has been my question. But I think for the Yanzi context,
okay, let me put this question in a different way. I fully, kind of get, your point of view in the sense of we have to reconstruct the theory of communication with which we could, kind of highlight the contextualized meaning beyond the sayings and words. And then I think that, kind of you already showed clearly, kind of how those kind of nonverbal communication displayed in the kind of text, kind of signify, the differences across, cultures. But my point is a bit more, hermeneutic questions. Whether we should see a particular type of silence. There is some kind of silence you are now, chasing into text is something which is already disclosed. It's use of silence, right? Or description of silence. So it is already, disclosed in a text. But I just want to say a bit about, kind of particular type of silence. That means that hasn't been disclosed in a text, which is often termed in the field of political philosophy in terms, kind of the art of writing something between the lines. This is really non-verbal sign or cue when you read, kind of text, right? Because, kind of text says that he's silent, okay? Yanzhi became silent, although he was very eloquent, we already kind of recognize it by reading that, kind of is that what author wanted to say. it is more likely, it is not about finding out the kind of context in which what is illocutionary and locutionary, right? So rigidly speaking, this kind of silence, putting something between the lines, might be much more, or even we can say, true nonverbal communication within a written text. Actually, this kind of silence in a written text can be more imperative than the description of silence in a text. If we don't see a protagonist like Socrates in a text, is not considered as an author, Yanzhi as well. So given this, so let me put the first question in this way: how we can understand the role of silence as a nonverbal sign in relationship between author and readers? Do you think that we'd better leave aside this kind of silence in our understanding of classical Chinese text? I mean, we'd better put aside the author's pedagogical goal or purpose or his or her strategy of writing something between the lines and see only about the aspect of the silence, which was described as a non-verbal communication in a text. If it is so, why? And even if so, is there any need for us to figure out silence which is not written or described in a text?
Yeah, this is a very, very difficult and very, very fruitful question. Not just between the line. So not just between the line. Every time we say something, we need to silence other things. The moment that we have been saying something,
but it was described by author, right?
Yeah. So when
author, because we are guided by author to read that silence, particular silence, in particular kind of conversational is that the situation. So there would be one more kind. When you say is that the me and you and us, with the is that the nonverbal signs in a text. I think there is one more dimension. We have to mention something about silence, particularly in a written text, because you and me, as well, all authors might not want to put everything they want. Speaking the truth is not that easy, even in early Chinese context. So that is one actually. Okay, let me move on to with another question. That is
before that, I think, but one thing to do that is to look at the parallel text. If we don't have to think people read what other people have written down. So one similar argument has variations across different texts. Then
Yanzhi Chunqiu, we don't know even who wrote that up. Right.
Yeah, 燕子春秋 we don't have. But
and then we don't know actually, who wrote that up. And then we actually didn't know that, don't know that, it has, actually happened that way.
Yeah, but silence appear more than the 燕子春秋. So I think you're right. Between the lines and why put something into the text is one most important question we should ask about silence.
And then we could see why Gongqi mentioned that up, and Yanzhi as a most wisest person. With that silence, right? So these are all somehow having another dimension of intentions. And then, text telling us, something. So that's why, I was fascinated with your writing, and the arguments. And then I just popped up with the question because you are, giving us all cases which were written in, on early Chinese, classical text. Okay, let me have another practical question, a little bit more to, put forward this, dimension a bit. What about the case of a remonstrance? I presume that remonstrance as a form of nonverbal communication might be one of the most complicated and arguable conducts to be interpreted in early Chinese classical text. Because as you know that the remonstrance as a combination of Jian, persuading superiors when they are wrong, and Zheng, candid criticism. Is this kind of, particular form of, is it non-verbal or verbal, is that the communication often taken as an eminence, evidence of someone's moral vigilance in classical Chinese text, as we can see from many texts, when it is conducted appropriately, demonstration as a non-verbal communication is not taken as a form of disrespect or resistance. On the contrary, it is taken as a higher form of respect. As you can say, Analects, Mengzi, Sunzi, Book of Rites, and Book of Filial Piety. I have seen through all, because I'm now interested in a kind of topic of family. Remonstrance has been taken as the most appropriate form of verbal or non-verbal sign, with which is somebody who's inferior can rectify somebody who's a superior, and when particularly the latter makes something wrong. And I think this is can be a kind of more, form of a non-verbal communication, which can be, combined with the silence, right? At this juncture, I have some questions. As we can see from your interpretation, Yanzhi, Chunchu, Yanzhi used silence as a non-verbal form of a remonstration to rectify his ruler's wrongs. In the text, he uses silence to show his disagreement with Lord Jing's intention to kill. And his silence, Yanzhi's silence, is surely intended to be notified by Lord Jing, right? At the same time, his silence could appear to signify what was wrong with Lord Jing's irresponsible ruling, and thereby it ultimately aims to teach Lord Jing or his people. But at this juncture, there is a question popping up. What if Lord Jing cannot recognize Yanzhi's, remonstration with the silence? Is there any specific reason that Lord Jing should recognize his remonstration, except for what has been written by author in the text? Because, is that we are giving us some sign by, silence as a way to show my disagreement with the other person. But the other person is somehow indifferent to me or my action or my silence. That could be, is that really, is that often, we can see, in many cases, right? So why you think that Lord Jing should recognize Yanzhi's, remonstration with silence?
So one quick answer to that is that because that's against the normal way, the acceptable way that we communicate, that make my intention understandable by you. So I think to
he could have thought that this is rude, right? He could have thought that this is not a kind of appropriate form of remonstration.
And this is rude. Many people will say this is super rude, but he is Master Yan. And also the other story shows that when Lord Jing has a crazy intention to kill somebody, actually most people are like Prime Minister. Yes, Prime Minister, they'll jump in and say, yes. So he is very...
So which means that all those kind of interpretations, is that the Lord Jing is supposed to recognize Yanzhi's, remonstration with the silence, because it was written, it was described.
But he recognized and not, because of their silence, he not only shows that you should put a heavy labor to people to a stop, but also that, hey, you have a moral problem wanting to do that, but he doesn't get it.
I see. I just want to say something about to what extent to which we can say that the text delivers facts without any fabrications. As a kind of
deliver facts.
Yeah, as a scholar in the field of Western political philosophy, as you can see that Thucydides wrote things that happen the Athenian assembly. However, those are all fake. He fabricated stories to deliver the message he wanted to say. Plato as well. Plato hid his name when he wrote what Socrates said in his Republic.
Now, I will want to be more cautious with the word fake, because what are we doing in our daily life communication? We take a social roles and then we communicate. But are we communicating spontaneously? I wonder. I mean, a person like me, I always very consciously aware of, am I talking to a peer, to a senior scholar, young scholar? I need to be more cautious about how they feel. So we take roles. It's fabricated, but it doesn't mean it's fake. So I think for early Chinese
I mean, you know, kind of is that you got me wrong in a sense that I fully understand what you wanted to say through reading, you know, kind of classical text and then sort out, you know, particular cases as a way to show is a kind of particular function of a non-verbal, you know, kind of is that the, you know, communication in early Chinese context. I really appreciate it. But it is somehow, it's a question of pedagogy and then hermeneutics, because you're reading the text, which was written a long time ago. And then, yes, because of that, there are two dimensions. One, you are reading as a kind of things that happen and then describe, you know, kind of way that, you know, kind of you are saying, you know, kind of just like it happens here next to you. But it is written text, which means that it was happened a long time ago. And the story actually was, you know, kind of is the layout by the author. And that author had a particular intention to lay out things they knew, things they saw. So this is a kind of two different dimensions. And then somehow I just wonder that could be methodologically, might be more persuasively, you know, kind of explain why in some way you can, you know, kind of, you know, include such a kind of worries about, you know, kind of your readings of classical text from getting wrong with your whole argument. That is what I mean by. It's not about fake, but I mean that, you know, everybody knows that Socrates in the book of the Republic didn't actually, you know, kind of go to the kind of port for seeing, you know, kind of festivals. It was, you know, made by Plato. And then he wanted to give some message for us. So that classical text, you know, kind of particularly those, you know, who had a kind of, you know, anonymous author, I think it's very important, like Yang Chunchu, because authors, contemporaries might know that, you know, what he's talking about. But when we translate and interpret those texts, we might need to be very careful, not as a kind of things that happen here next to you. However, we have to see what messages actually the author tried to deliver by saying remonstration. Because remonstration is not that easy though. Son to father, not easy. However, as you can see that it should be mildly, and then, you know, kind of King Shun, you know, kind of in Mengzhi, terribly, you know, kind of was that the difficult case, you know, kind of nobody actually could imitate. But that is why just I'm saying. So the last question, it is for, you know, kind of what actually this is what I learned from you, so that maybe you might want to, you know, kind of lay out a little bit more. Given that, just like, you know, kind of silence, you know, as a form of, you know, kind of demonstration, non-verbal communication, was particularly held in an asymmetrical relationship, such as parents and children, kings and his retainers. I'm wondering if remonstration as a non-verbal communication can be used for us to rectify dysfunctional or unjust relationships in our daily lives. Science has been known as a way of a demonstration in many ways, right? It can underscore a message, signal, you know, injustices, or deliver a message to opponents. What about silence as a form of a non-verbal communication and democratic deliberation, or these days, you know, conversation with us, you know, having a kind of all the time? Is it the kind of is the democratic deliberation, or our sort of arguments, you know, kind of debates are not always peaceful, right? It can give rise to irreconcilable conflicts, as we can see what's going on in liberal democratic societies here and there these days. Could you give me, you know, some of, you know, kind of your insights in what way we could use these, you know, kind of your, you know, kind of interpretations of non-verbal communication in early Chinese context? You know, we can apply them to, you know, kind of with that having a kind of respect, the meaningful life, you know, kind of with us, each other, you know, in the deliberative situation.
Yeah, this has been something that I want to take more deeply in terms of silence in the political discourse, because the bad reputation about silence in free speech discourse has been more widely known. But then once we realize the distribution of what we can speak, how we can speak is never fair, and also even what we say is never equated with what has been heard, then sometimes expressions of silence can be a performance, a collective choice for us to be reminded that our words is never meaningful, our words is never heard, and most importantly, we can not be all oriented towards what people say, because what people say always covers up what people don't want to say and what people should have said. And those are the things that are very rectifiable. I think it's more about attention. We are so easily drawn to words debates, and then we rarely question, why not that? Why don't you say that? Why those people haven't expressed their voice? So something we direct attention to will give us a new reading of the whole situation. But the obsession with words and debates and trust in words and deliberation is something that we can think about. It's not that we need to overthrow everything. It's not an either or. It's a dilemma. A lot of times, I think many people will say, if you are in power, better remain silent, at least for certain moments, because your voice impose a direction, an idea to people, and then you unintentionally silence other people. So all this kind of dynamic is what interests me as well.
This is fantastic. Actually, kind of all those, theories talking about democratic deliberation, emphasizing and focused on words and sayings, kind of communications in words. But your, kind of is that findings from Chinese, kind of early, kind of context, it, kind of just remind me of how much, kind of is that I was, kind of struck with the kind of conception of forgetting in Zhuangzi. It was a bit, kind of is that turning upside down of the view that, kind of how we could make a kind of good conversation, deliberation with other people. We could stop, kind of talking each other, or you just stop and then trying to listen instead of speak out. That means that sometimes democratic deliberation is working, right? Okay, this message is perfectly, kind of is that important, and then I look forward to your, further, kind of elaboration in your next, project and book, and then looking forward to it. Okay, thank you very much. I think, enough for the kind of bringing, kind of is that some questions, I believe. But why don't I start with my colleagues, kind of is that Professor Wang Kun, okay? Wang Laoshi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, why don't you have a question? Thank you very much for coming in your packed schedule.
Thank you very much for Professor Yuan. I really get a lot from your excellent lecture. And I'm very interested in your lecture. I think the question Professor Kwok raises is more exciting, and I want to ask some more about the silence. I think you said a lot, very in depth, about the silence in Chinese culture, and your lecture reminds me of the Chinese cultural tradition of 赋诗言志, that is reciting a poetic or poetics to express one's emotions and wills, especially in the 先秦, in 先秦, 春秋战国, and in the situations of reciting poetics, many people have found that the interpretation of the poetics is not based on any universal meanings of the poetics, but it's rather situational. So I think that is another comparative aspects of your nonverbal theory of communication and Chinese cultural tradition. So the translation and the interpretation of the poetics in the situations of reciting poetics to express one's emotions. I think in these situations, the translation of these poetics is how to say, can be comparative to what you said about the silence. That is, the the silent or the how to say interpretation of the the interpretation of the poetics is not the interpretations is beyond the universal meanings or the basic interpretations of the poetics, and it's rather how to say it's rather situational, contextual, and relies on one's emotional experiences and one's understanding of the situation. So the interpretation of the poetics I think can be compared with what you said about the silence, which is also manifested by the physical movements like laughing and singing and dancing and other movements. So the movements, especially the poetics, is always sang and accompanied by dancing in Chinese traditions. So the interpretation or the reciting of the poetics is not saying something. The reciting says nothing, but it says the silence, I think. So that is your lecture. That is how your lecture reminds me of what I'm studying, especially about the poetics. And my question is about the relationships, especially how the silence can subvert the power relationships in traditional society, especially the Confucian society. As known to us, the basic relationships is 5 rules, 5 伦, the 5 ethical rules, and it has been accepted that 5伦 is the basic role relationships and cannot be subverted. But I still have a question. How can this 5 basic role relationships can be subverted in silence, or the poetic language? The poetic language is beyond the universal meaning, but it's rather situational. So that is also what I am interested in recent times, in my recent studies. As Confucius says, 兴于诗，立于礼，成于乐. So our words and expressions is embedded in the poetics. But how can the poetic language subvert the universal or basic 5 ethical rules? So that is my question. And I see in your lecture that you quoted 庄子, especially the gardener laughing at the 子贡, and that is very good examples. And it's just like the powerful people has been criticized, but not criticized by words, but criticized and subverted by the poetic movements, the laughing. So the laughing is quite poetic, I think. And it is also a manifestation of silence, the silent subversion of the powerful people. I think that is very meaningful and significant. But still, my question is, how can this poetic laughing or poetic movements, poetic actions, the manifestation of silence can subvert the basic 5 ethical rules? That is my question. Do you think, is it possible?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, Yuan老师.
Thank you so much. I will definitely read your works again and then look into the 诗言志 and quote you about that. I am not familiar with the 诗 studies, but I think you are completely right. While we are reciting a poetry, we are definitely situating the meaning in ourselves. But to what extent we, exactly like nonverbal signal, we allow the meaning to be unfixed, to be open and keep on developing. And that's what the beauty of both words and silence, that the meaning is never fixed. And about relationship, I think that will interest more people because we're living in a hierarchical society with very fixed roles. How can we really subvert it? But I think one thing to think about power is that the relationship is one way to consider its social roles. But while we are talking, different kinds of relationship and power dynamics has been created with words. And that's the part we can think about in an elevator. It's such a neutral place, but where you sit, where you stand next to a person is never that neutral. And in the elevator, if you simply just, close your purse, you already send a signal to me that, hey, I perceive you as stranger. You don't look very honest to me. That's why I need to look at whether the zipper of my purse is closed. So it's something like that changes two strangers, which stand neutral to each other, into a relationship that's harmful, and that's not ideal. So with silence, a ruler, a minister is always a ruler and a minister. But at the same time, they can be two friends confronting a political issue. They can be a teacher and a student at the same time. They could also become a betrayer and a betrayed object. So the relationship is constantly in changing. And while we are saying that, we are making new relationships, and that new relationship is sometimes not necessarily articulate. We never articulate, hey, now we become more familiar with each other. We become more friends than just colleagues. But we never say that, but we do that. We express that. And also by using like laughter or silence or sighing or bodily movement where you are allowed to stand next to the ruler, the whole genre of the text changes. Right now, students will understand this as a very formal or professional scholarly discussion. But then I think while we can see each other, and because I know Professor Kwok much longer, then it's more friendly. It's more like a friendship exchange. So there are multiple meanings creating at the same time. Then this kind of power is not that socially confined and hierarchically stable, but it's rather flux in our behavior. And then I think I'm going into more extreme by saying that we are creating the power. So the power is never there.
Thank you very much. And you reminds me another words by Mencius, who says, 睡大人则藐之. If you want to persuade a powerful person, you should disregard him, 藐视, disregard him. And Chen Yi also, I think Chen Yi knows Mencius very much. So when Chen Yi persuades the emperor, he should be sitting and the emperor should stand. So he himself is teacher and the emperor is student. That is another Mencius tradition of 睡大人则藐之. But I think, but I have another question. That is, the Mencius status to the ruler, 睡大人则藐之, is also a rule. Could we, if we receive the tradition, just like Chen Yi accept this tradition of Mencius' attitude to the reader, attitude to the ruler, 睡大人则藐之. So we should disregard the ruler. We should disregard 大人, the powerful person. So that become another principle, or it become a rule itself. So that is what Mencius said, 君臣以义和. The ruler and the minister should communicate based on the principle. The principle is what Matthew said. You should disregard the 大人. So it become another principle, another rule. And that is also one principle in 五伦, the five basic ethical rules. So it's hard to say whether the principle itself is how to say is unmovable, or the principle itself can be interpreted situational. And my question is just like yours, whether the nonverbal communication or the poetic interpretation of the classics should be universal or should be principle. The universal is based on the principle, or the poetic interpretation should be more flexible, more contextual and situational. So my question is also the universal or the unique, or the in other words, is it universal or situational? Thank you.
All right, I think that maybe kind of this is somehow circular, so that somehow we better kind of put aside kind of later after having kind of more questions from students. And then excellent thing. Thank you very much for your thoughtful questions. Okay, let me go with the kind of with the students. Okay, Sujing, Zhao Sujing, can you hear me?
Oh yes.
I don't have a question.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Yuan, for your insightful lecture. As you have mentioned in your paper, silence is an important form of nonverbal communication, as exemplified by the Yanzi's strategic silence. My question is a little bit okay. He attracted the attention of the Lord Jing and challenged his authority with silence. But also, as you have said, the sender and the receiver of the silence is both important. So I think that this kind of silence will make some difference only when the recipient, like Lord Jing Gong, is willing to hear his voice. But however, I think that there might be some cases like silence is misunderstood as having no opinion, or some people are forced to be silent. I mean that forced to be silent in two conditions. One is that the authority don't let them speak, don't hear their opinions. And the other one is some people are deaf, or they cannot speak. So I wonder that how you would think of these cases. And do you think that the emphasis of the importance of silence can be related to the promotion of the justice for those people are disabled people, they are silent? Okay. That's my question.
It's the same question, actually. You should have answered that. Okay. So Yuan Lao Shi.
A beautiful question from the student. I love it. So I think you point out a very important part as well, and think about a person not being able to speak, right? But not being able to speak also has many reasons. Sometimes we think that person just don't have the chance to speak up, but sometimes it's even worse. Even when that person speak clearly with strong evidence, like the novel To Kill a Mockingbird, it's also turned into a movie. With all the evidence, people can't hear that. And what's even worse is that people do not has a bad intention, not wanting to hear that. People just have the strong bias and prejudice. Like in the old time, they would just believe women cannot study math. It's not that they really want to suppress women from studying math, but they have the strong bias in their background, in their mind, that really stop them from rationalizing things. So to point that out, your question is only one hand to let us question our ability to think, ability to say, is there really something that could ultimately render justice? On the other hand, as you said, it will direct our attention to, oh, what if those people actually don't say things? Are they simply being silenced? Are they simply being ignorant? Or there is actually something going on there in behaving silently, they are saying something. So by writing out the possibility of understanding silence, we can look into the behavioral silence in different way. So those are the things. So I think your question is beautiful. Thank you for your question.
Well, actually, the same questions again and again. Silence can be mistaken, right?
I can answer in different formatting, and I think those are very.
So agreement, indifference, is resistance. There's many ways, right? So that you just try to put that into the kind of specific conversation situation, and then you're reading text, kind of particularly from that, kind of is that the perspective. So it's the same questions again and again coming from the kind of is Wang Kun, Lao Shi, and Zhao Shujing, and the me as well. It's a silence in some way, your interpretation supposed to be recognized as a kind of remonstration, but it is guided by the text. Right. So that, kind of, if you try to take that in a particular case and, apply to the kind of what you want to say something about, nonverbal communication, and then reconstruct, kind of nonverbal communication as a way of saying something about, I think, kind of these two dimensions need to be, bridged by something else. And then you have to preclude possible worries, kind of is that otherwise, because if you're using that case, it's just happening here next to you. We can say that why, kind of Lord Jing supposed to recognize. And then, Wang Kun Laoshi said, the really Yanzi could, kind of, subvert its relationship as you think, as way that, kind of is that the sender and receiver, subject, the king, all of a sudden, coming to the teacher and, and the student. What if not? It's, kind of is that the Hanfei said, kind of, and then Machiavelli said, power holder is not that easy to handle at all. So that, somehow, and another thing is the innuendo, metaphor, silence as a kind of nonverbal, kind of communication, all having some intention, right? So that intention, kind of which was not spoken or, kind of exposed, supposed to be interpreted by receivers as well as readers, you and me, very different way, right? So that, kind of, maybe you might want to elaborate later on, even in a, kind of personal, kind of exchange with me. I just want to know a little bit about, because I'm reading, kind of classical text, which was written 1,000 years ago. And then I was wondering that, why, the author, kind of wrote in this way. Mengzi is very clear, right? Mengzi thinks us, kind of, when you try to remonstrate, you should disregard, even if there is a powerful person, right? That does not mean that, kind of, it's a disrespect. But that doesn't mean that, kind of, he wants to say something else instead of, kind of, is that, but this is something very important, I think, because your message is only about the third question I put you. That is how we could apply this kind of cases to the kind of is that the way of life we are living with. But that is very clear. But how we could understood, interpret those cases in the text in that way is another question, right? Kind of is the why, kind of the author of Yanzhi Chun to put the kind of Yanzhi silence in this way. And why Gongji actually interpret or took that case, when he said something about, kind of how much he was wise enough. Because Yanzhi was very famous and he's very wise. We all know that, right? So that is one one thing actually, we are having questions again and again, and then I'm just kind of elaborate as a way that we don't have to have these questions again, because you already mentioned and then clarified, and some other question coming with. I just want to cut off from now on, okay? But we still have some kind of with the puzzles. Okay, let me go with Yongjia. Jia Yongjia, can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you, Professor.
Okay, have a question, but no more question about this, okay?
Oh, okay, sure. Professor Yuan, thanks for your wonderful lecture. I have a question about Zigong's case and the gardener. I'm just wondering, could it possible just in that particular case, Zigong is right, his proposal is effective, because if there is some communication, maybe the gardener and Zigong can figure out who is right. And because in Meng's text, he also gave an example about a gardener made a mistake by pulling up his sprouts. So I'm wondering, given the fact that human beings are fallible animals, so cognitively speaking, so what if Zigong is right? Although we know that in Zhuangzi text, Zigong is kind of a very bad guy, and he kind of always show off. But what if on this particular matter, he has good intention and his advice is effective? This is my question. Thank you.
But I think you are right. You are right. Zigong has no bad intention, and Zigong is right in terms of efficiency. So I think the Zhuangzi is simply wanting to use this laughter to say that the way you talk to me and what you told me is nothing that I conceive of Dao related. So I think then in that case, there's no judgment of Zigong has bad intention, but Zigong is wrong according to the Zhuangzi as well. So I think a lot of research also shows that then in the Zhuangzi, when he become angry with somebody, it doesn't mean that somebody wants to harm Zhuangzi or the figure of the Zhuangzi. It's simply because they have different ideas or assumptions that they want to pursue the Dao. So I think you're right.
Thank you. Why don't I go with Zhu Haoyuan?
Professor, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Professor Yuan, thank you for your excellent lecture. And I have a problem. You mentioned that non-verbal communication is sometimes used for self-persuasion, such as silence, because speaking out might lead to deadly danger. So regarding the interpretation of non-verbal communication, is there a danger that it might not reflect the relationship between people, but rather the relationship between the individuals and the interpretive authority of the power? Maybe the political power or something just like the dominant power in a special context. In other words, is it the power that determines whether people are allowed to express themselves in certain ways? Although the ways are different from time to time, they have a range to perform. Or does the interpretive authority of power regulate not only verbal but also non-verbal communication and even the forms of subversion, resistance, and reversal? That's my question. Thank you.
It's always a threat that when an idea is being brought up about, then some authority just take it and use it. So Zhuangzi's freedom is frequently the case, and then silence is definitely easily being manipulated. So if somebody just becoming silenced, and then we say actually, they chose to be silent, but then if we look at the danger that language and speech or debates brought about, then we can think about to what extent at this particular context, even when people are freely able to speak and lie and argue shamelessly, then why certain institution and individual at this particular context chose to remain silent instead of engaging in a debate which is full of made up lies? Then there could be one other reason to think about that. So I think it's a very noble concern that if we are constantly taking into concern and thinking about silence, and that's why Professor Kwa asked about, so what we can learn about the paradox of silence, and that's ultimately should be a project. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, shall I go with Hua Xiaoyang? Xiaoyang, can you hear me?
Yes, Professor.
Why don't you have a question?
My question is, Professor, you treat non-verbal communication as something separate from verbal communication. I wonder, in early Chinese texts, can we really separate the two so clearly? For example, silence usually happen in the middle of conversation. Doesn't that suggest that the non-verbal actions are actually part of the verbal interaction, not something entirely separate? That's my question.
Definitely. Nonverbal should be part of the verbal communication, but nonverbal communication is not part of what they say. So by thinking about what is laughter, then we will think about I laugh and say, oh, it's an interesting paper, can have different meanings. So you're totally right that I shouldn't separate verbal from nonverbal, but I do separate nonverbal from utterances, so words. And I do highlight that if you see a lot of quotes, evidence, and about what people have been studying about Chinese scholarship, then they rarely pay attention to the nonverbal aspects of communication. So I think you're right.
Thank you.
Okay, let me go with Zhu Tingxuan.
Yes, Professor.
Okay, I can hear you.
Okay, Professor Yuan, thanks for your lecture. And my question is, you have said that this nonverbal communication in early China is best understood in relations, and it's about relations between sender and receiver. And you said it's not based on a shared understanding. Therefore, this nonverbal communication seems to me is highly particular. Its interpretation highly depends on very particular situations and relations. So I'm wondering if this kind of nonverbal communication, the way we understand it and we focus on it, has any normative aspects. Can this understanding of nonverbal communication with openness and particularity becoming somehow regulative? Can we have some norms in accordance with this nonverbal communication? And what kind of norms can this understanding of nonverbal communication bring to us? This is my question.
In early Chinese society, we have had long-time norms. That is ritual communication. The way I can greet a ruler, the way I should sleep. So Confucius' 礼记相党篇 has been articulating how we normally communicate. But I think you could be asking, what is the norm we can learn from nonverbal uncertainty, right? Then I think when we think about communication, then I think many people want to assume that you have to understand, uptake my intention, uptake what I intend to deliver to you as my meaning is something we consider successful. But I think as the Yanzi's case also tells us, a lot of times nonverbal signals can, of course, my intention matters. If I laugh, wanting to show your kindness, then you understand as something patronizing. Then your attitude also counts. Your interpretation also take part in the involving reading of the laughter. So how the relationship in a communication keep on negotiating what exactly is the meaning is something communication studies have not been appreciating. There are a lot of problems as well. If I say no and you take yes, that's violating my rights and my speech act. But sometimes if I don't know what I mean, or if I only mean teaching, but you take it as a stronger notes, it's not that harmful. So the nonverbal uncertainty, if you think about the norm of uncertainty, that means the receiver and the sender can be contributing to the co-creation of the meaning. And that might be something valuable to certain cases. I see the danger as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Sun Yue, this is the last question, or possibly one more.
Yes, can you hear
Okay,
me?
I can hear you.
Yes, here's my question. In nonverbal communication, the observer is not merely a passive onlooker, but an active participant in redefining the meaning of the behavior. Does this imply that the meaning of nonverbal communication is something constructed and interpreted retrospectively, and therefore we need not overly concern ourselves with the authenticity of the speaker's original intent? That's all. Thank you.
Even a question coming up again.
Brilliant question. Yeah, I think so. So I take that the editor of the text, as Professor Kwok notes, take that into a consideration. So your reaction to the interpreter, onlooker's reading of my signal will heavily influence how I respond to you next.
All right, thank you very much. And then actually, the other person is not answering back to the kind of our inquiry. So that, and then, time already passed and the people are leaving now, so that we better, kind of wrap up. Thank you very much. This is really, fantastic project. And then I really look forward to your, is that the book coming out soon. And then also look forward to your another project, which is about, silence. It's very fascinating because, is that the most non-verbal communication conducts of those people socially marginalized, subordinated. Silence is the most important kind of tools by which they could show, what they, want to rectify. So that we can see, Zhuangzi, we can see Yanzhi, and all those people actually showing, their kind of goes out by non-verbal communication, right? So that in that is one that actually makes us very fascinated with your reading, and then try to find out, is that whether it was actually, what that, mean by in that, particular, context, and as well as, beyond that context, which means, is that us as a who's now reading, all the text. And another thing is also, I'm just really want to know more, that is, what if, we put this, findings from Chinese, early, classical text into our conversational stance in relationship with other people. We just said, we become a kind of co-creator of a new order, spontaneously responding to one another, right? However, it also brings up, is that the other way around, relegating, something, which can be pretty peacefully, is that, settled down, somehow become, more difficult, and then more, irreconcilable kind of case we might have. So that we could see about how we could, think of, silence as a kind of variegated forms of is that our way of talking with other people, way of delivering our, thoughts to other people, way of democratic deliberation. That is also another, fantastic topic. That's why I was very, is that interest in, and then I'm still interested in, of course. And then I was very fascinated with your first, talk you made, Zhuhai, a long time ago. And then we all remember that. And then now, finally, we have another round, and I'm very happy to have a kind of some more kind of ideas coming out of your talk. And then I sincerely appreciate, and then I sincerely appreciate your kind of is that the kind, non-verbal as well as verbal communication with us. And so I sincerely appreciate, looking forward to kind of scholarly collaboration with you in the future in many different topics, including silence as well as the family. And I sincerely appreciate that you join us in your packed schedule.
And thank you, and thank you for all your colleagues and students and all those amazing questions. I'll have to really address them seriously so the book can be persuasive. If I see all the questions coming up again, that means it has to be precautiously discussed. So those are very important for me. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, kind of Yuan Lao Shi. And then thank you for all who join us kind of today. This is comparative philosophy workshop organized by the Department of Philosophy, Zhuhai Campus, Sun Yat-sen University. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.